Hello? New rules? Who this?
Who's calling my phone?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Battle Red Nation, to this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your Texans Credential Media members and insiders. That is Big Sarge, Brian Big Sarge Badfield. I am John Hickman. Welcome to today's show. We'll be talking with Cole Thompson. Got a couple of segments to talk the draft. It is officially April. We are wrapping up draft season. And I don't know about you guys, but I am tired. So that's why we brought on Cole. We also look at NFL's new rules and how they could benefit the Houston Texans. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And again, for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Big Sarge.
John Hickman, greetings and salutations.
Is it kickoff? Is it 35? Is it new rules? Man, they going live. Who's calling my phone? Who's calling that? No, we got to talk new rules, NFL new rules. Kickoff change rules, which can greatly impact the sport altogether. And Houston has one of the best special teams in the NFL. So let's dive into that, Big Sarge.
You know, John, one thing that was kind of different for me last season as far as the games were concerned was the way that they changed the kickoff, and it reminded me a lot of what the XFL was doing. And so what the NFL said was, okay, we see that may help cut down on some of the concussion rates and some of the head injuries and the head traumas that these players were having, especially on the kickoffs, because the way that they had them separated so much when they came together, that was like there's just like a massive force running full speed at each other and colliding. You know, most of the time people say that, you know, former NFL players, will say that playing football is like running into a wall full speed, you know, continuously for however amount of time you're on the field. So one thing that I did like was that the NFL was able to cut down on that. What I did not like was there was not a lot of returns. And so last year, John, the year prior, the returns was 21.8%, one of the lowest it's ever been. And so what they did when they changed the rules last season was they were trying to invoke more returns but cut down on the collisions. And so it kind of improved it a little bit. It went from 21.8% in 2023 to 32.8% in 2024. But the problem was kickers kept kicking the ball into the end zone, limiting a lot of the returns, because they said, well, if on average you're going to if on average a return is 27.6 yards, we'll just give the other 2.4% and just start at the 30. But now what the NFL has said and what the NFL has done is they moved it. Now the touchback goes from the offense getting the ball on the 30-yard line to the offense getting the ball on the 35-yard line. Now, before I talk about how that will improve and help the Texans special teams, John, real quickly, do you know how much that's going to benefit the offense? And do you know how much that's going to change the defensive schemes? Because now you're trying to prevent 70 yards and a touchdown. Now it's 65. Yeah. So now for the defense, the field shrinks. Oh, it looks amazing as far as the returns are concerned, but it shrinks the field for the defense. So now these defensive coordinators are like, okay, and it seems like a minute thing because it's only 5 yards, but that 5 yards makes a whole lot of difference in an NFL game.
Absolutely.
And so when you look at that, what the NFL has said is, all right, since y'all kept kicking the ball out of the end zone, what we're going to do is we're going to make you kick it to a kick returner so we can bring back some of that excitement in the game. And how that benefits the Houston Texans is because they have by far one of the most dynamic kick returners in the game. I
when he
know
gets up to, before you dive into Dameon Pierce, because I can't wait for you to do that. What I also like is this does forces special teams to kind of work a little bit with the defense in a sense, because again, going from 70 to 65 may not seem like a lot to some people, but that is a lot in the game of inches, right?
yes.
Marcus Mosher, excuse me, our Locked On Cowboys host, he kind of put it out there, and I was like, man, that makes sense. How this can impact teams playing defense moving forward. He mentioned if he wonders if we'll see more aggressive blitzing and run blitzing, the bend don't break style of defense may not work as well when you only need to get 65 yards. And so I think that's something to look at on the defensive side of the ball. And then also for special teams, kickers not kicking it out the end zone because you don't want to bring them out to the 35. But what is the, where can you kick it inside the 5 to make it a little bit difficult for the returner? I like the rule. At first I didn't, but then I immediately changed my mind because I thought to myself, for one, the kickoff rule helped us out last year. You mentioned the numbers. It went up. We got some explosive returns last year. It was funner. But then this is also another challenge, smaller challenge, but a big challenge that the NFL is giving the defense and the special teams to combat offense. So I'm excited to see how it'll play out. And again, I'm also excited to see how the Houston Texans can utilize this to play in their favor with Frank Ross leading the way. And I know you're going to get into it. I think Dameon Pierce should have a role on this team in that space.
And real quickly, before I talk about Dameon Pierce, I also look at Frank Ross is by far one of the top 5 special teams coaches in the NFL. And what he's always been able to do is adjust and adapt to anything that's thrown his way. And so now he's like, okay, so we got to kick it off and we got to kick it in play. We'll just kick it in play. We'll make sure that Kaimi Fairbairn puts it in a place to whereas my guys can get down there and still make a tackle. There wasn't a lot of they don't give up a lot of yards as far as on kick returns with the Houston Texans. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, they have been by far one of the best, been a top 5 special teams unit over the last 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And so how that benefits Dameon Pierce. And John, you and I talked about what would Dameon Pierce's role be on this team. And because unfortunately we got to talk about him going into his third offensive system as a running back. And so since he's coming to the league, he's been in 3 different systems and 3 different running styles, 3 different blocking schemes. And so now he's heading into a new one. But where he has made his money, where his bread is buttered at, John, is on special teams. And that's you got to give a special shout out to Frank Ross too, seeing that in Dameon Pierce and saying, okay, so if y'all not going to use him, you're not going to use him as much as far as the running back is concerned. Hey, let me have him. I got a place for him. And when they put him back there, John, I mean, like I said, there was a lot of times teams stopped kicking at Dameon Pierce because they said, hey, look, if he gets this ball, he's lying to take it to the house. And I think that when I talked with Dameon Pierce on last season, talking to him about special teams, he told me, he said, I played special teams a lot in high school until they stopped kicking it to me. He said it got to the point where they would not kick the ball to me anymore. And it looked like that's exactly what teams were doing to him last season. So I like this rule because now one or two things are going to happen. Either you're going to kick to Dameon Pierce and take your chances on having the return, or you're going to give CJ the ball at the 35-yard line and say, and if he's going to do what we expect him to do, if what we're expecting with this Nick Caley offense, like think about it, John. They start at the 35. In 2 plays, they're already in on the opponent's side of the field. They could be on at the 50, at like the 45, and now they're making their way in to try to score. Because I look at it like this too. This year, John, we can't look and say that we cannot say, hey, as long as the Texans score. Field goals won't get it done this year, John. We're talking about touchdowns. You got to put the biscuit in the basket. And so you give CJ that amount of field position, I think he's going to be better. And I think that Dameon Pierce will benefit from this.
And also we look at a Dameon Pierce who, again, like you mentioned, didn't necessarily get a lot of opportunities to return last year. 9 attempts, 339 yards. So we're looking at a guy that was able to do a very good job when he got the opportunity to return. His longest last year at 80 yards, the year prior, 98 yards. Clearly in that year, 7 attempts, 225 yards for a TD. Clearly, this is an area in Dameon Pierce's game, a running back that a player altogether that's going to need to find a way to get on the field. And so now I'm looking at Dameon Pierce and I'm thinking to myself, this is the opportunity for you. And then on top of that, for the Houston Texans, they averaged nearly 32 yards per return last year. So now with teams possibly having to, force to kick it to a returner, that is, again, will play into the favor of a very good, disciplined special team unit that gets the most out of whoever returning the football for the Houston Texans. And I also think this is a great opportunity for Houston to solidify who's going to be the return man, because that was an issue up and down last year. Was it going to be Dameon? Was it going to be Robert Woods? Who was it going to be? So we got draft talk coming up, Sarge.
Well, wait, John, one more real quickly. I just have a question to ask you before we move on, and this is a short question. With the way that the rules have been changed, as far as the kickoff rule has been changed, if you're Nick Caserio in the later rounds, do you draft a guy that could potentially play? I mean, could be on your special teams as a returner?
Yeah, absolutely. That guy could be a 5th, 6th round pick that you may look to use in another position, but that's a weapon of his, and I think that's probably the thought process, especially now. Find a guy that can do a multitude of things on a football field.
Or undrafted guy that may get a invite to camp.
There you go. When we come back, we will be talking to Cole Thompson about the NFL draft. We are about 3.5 weeks away, so gear up. We got Cole. Before we talk NFL draft, let's talk right now. Rockets are about to go to the playoffs. Astros have kicked off their season. Houston Roughnecks got football going on. It's something for everybody, and Gametime makes it easier to find last-minute tickets at unbeatable prices. Check out the Gametime app. There's always amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up, and also with a peace of mind aspect with shopping with Gametime, because now you can view your seat before you buy. No surprise fees at lowest price guaranteed. You can book with total confidence. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. As promised, Cole Thompson, the man that knows all the prospects that you don't know and knows more about the prospects that you absolutely know about. Cole, thank you for stopping by the Locked On Texans podcast.
Brother, can we just get to draft season? Like, can we get to Thursday night on April 25th and just call it a day? Like, can we get to that point? Because if we're at that level of what are the Texans going to do? What's going to be the right pick? And I'm going to be completely real with you. It's not going to be there at 25. So can we just ramp up all the way until we get to that Saturday, then we can regroup and look back 5 years from now and say, hey, it was the right pick, or no, it was absolutely the wrong pick, because that's what happens at pick 25 in this draft.
And hopefully that is a pick that Houston can use to, get themselves over the hump, make a conference championship game. But it does feel like, before we even talk about the draft, it does feel like, of all of the years, and I think maybe we are spoiled a little bit, because 2 years ago, we saw Houston shock the world, draft CJ and Will Anderson back-to-back. Last year, they were able to address needs, but they also had an awesome free agency, right?
Yeah.
This year, I think because free agency has been so, bland a little bit, and the expectations that are kind of surrounded this draft, Cole. I mean, you mentioned it. If you're not in the top 10, trade back. That's something that you said before we got to recording, but it feels like this draft is full of wide receiver 2s with, good number 1 potential, wide receiver 3s, tackles that are expected to shift inside, guards that you're questionable about. This draft does feel like a draft where we may look back down the road and say, yeah, it wasn't that many guys that were definitively stars that came out that draft.
I don't think it's that level. What I will say is that when I'm looking at several positions that you really are like very excited about. The Texans don't have the need there. Like they don't. Like cornerback is one where I really like the very beginning of this draft. Like I am very big on Travis Hunter being an all-pro cornerback by the end of his third season in the NFL. I think Will Johnson is completely falling off draft boards, and somebody's going to get a steal, whether that be at pick number 11, whether that be at pick number 15, pick number 17. I do believe that he can be such a talented cornerback, but here's the problem, John. Houston's got an all-pro in Derek Stingley, and they got a Pro Bowl caliber dude in Kamari Lassiter on the other side. So it's like, hey, we don't need a quarterback. Oh, well, the safety class, Nick Emanwari, dude is built like an action figure, and he hits like a heat-seeking missile. And it's like, that's such a good D'Amico dude. It's like, yeah, but you just brought in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and you drafted Kalen Bullock last year. You don't need a safety. So then you look at the other positions, and it's like, okay, well, that's the problem, is that you don't need a wide receiver 1, but the wide receiver 2s that are going to be available for you, do you really want it at pick 25 when the value maybe is going to be there at, say, pick 38 if you were to trade down? Or you could get a guy that could be just as talented at pick 58. And then you look at the offensive tackles and you're saying to yourself, well, Armand Membo coming out of Missouri is a plug-and-play dude that I think is going to be a difference maker for the next 10 years. Okay, well, he's not going to be there at pick 25 after his combine and what we're going to see at his pro day. Well, Kelvin Banks is a guy that we're really high on and could be a difference maker at left tackle. We just traded Laramie Tunsil off to Washington, and we need to get a franchise blindside protector. Cam Robinson's a stopgap guy. Well, sure, but you're hoping that he falls to you at that point. You're not guaranteeing. Josh Simmons, he's such a talented player. Everyone's talking about him as he would have been a top 10 pick in this year's draft if he didn't get hurt. And then you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, but he got hurt. So he got hurt, and he's coming off of a patella injury. And John, I don't know if you know anything about patellas, but they don't always heal properly, and they're susceptible to having ruptures a second time. So you're talking about a guy that you're banking on all of his traits and all of his intangibles that are really good and no setbacks. So it's like, when you look at this draft, the needs that the Texans have to address at pick 25, it's one of those things where if you're not sold on a guy whatsoever and there's any opportunity for you to move down, do so. Because I'd much rather have more draft compensation, I'd much rather have more picks, and I'd much rather feel better about myself reaching for a guy later in round 2 or round 3 or even in round 4 and using that draft compensation, or having the picks to where I can take 2 offensive tackles and say, battle it out, figure out which one's going to be the starting left tackle for the long term. I can get 2 or 3 wide receivers and say, hey, you're a 4th round dude, you're a 2nd round dude. If the 4th round dude is outworking you, you're starting over him. I'd much rather have that type of thought process in this draft where the Texans are picking than have to feel like the guy that I'm taking at 25 better be a franchise cornerstone, when honestly, I'm not sure if he's there. And then there's a scenario of, well, do you trade up? Do you maybe move into like that top 13?
Because the hot name, I'm glad you mentioned that. The hot name that everybody's throwing around right now to trade up for is Matthew Golden.
And it makes sense. Like it does, because you want to know why? Johnny's a Z. He's a Z wide receiver and a damn good Z wide receiver. There's people out there, and honestly, I can't shame them for it. There are people out there that believe that he is the best wide receiver in this year's draft. And I'm not ready to go that far. I will say he is wide receiver 2 for me, and you need a wide receiver 2. He fits the mold. Tank Dell's going to be out for an entire year. When he gets back, I think at this point, just to save his body, you can't have him on the outside anymore at 165, so you got to move him inside to play the slot position. So you need that Z receiver. But let me ask you, Bill Barnwell came out with a scenario today with what would be the selection if you were the Texans to move on up? You move on up into the top 14. So let's just say you make the trade with Miami at pick number 13. The asking price in return is a 1st-round pick this year, a 2nd-round pick this year, and one of your 3rd-round picks.
That's too much.
Do you feel like that you're in a good position with all the needs that you have on the offensive line, with all the needs in the depth on the defensive line, with what you need to still address, that you're okay with just having 1 pick on day 2 at this point for Matthew Golden, who, let's just be clear, really talented receiver. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a wide receiver 1. Is that worth moving up? And that's where you are right now when it comes to making these moves.
And I'll say to that, like, you make that move. I love Matthew Golden. You and I have talked about this on several occasions on Sundays when I'm at the stadium, how much on Saturday, Quinn Ewers pissed me off, right? And I gotta come back and talk to you about it. But I think Matthew Golden, I think Isaiah Bond, I think Xavier Worthy. I think all of those receivers were held back by their quarterback play. That being said, you're not trading up for Malik Neighbors. You're not trading up for a Marvin Harrison. And then I think that's why we look at last year's class, and it was just a phenomenal class in terms of
John, you want me to pitch you off real fast? Who was pick number 25? The Texans' initial pick.
Yeah, I know.
You want to say his name, or should I say
about him for the next few years?
Should I say it? Because you're going to see him for the next several years. And Brian Thomas Jr. You're going to see him.
You look at that. Would you rather have Brian Thomas Jr. or Kamari Lassiter? And I think that's a great debate. But
it's a great debate. It's a great debate.
When I look at all of these guys this year, even with T-Mac, none of these guys are the generational wide receiver to trade that much of a haul for. However, I think the conversation that a lot of us are having internally and on social media with one another, we believe that Nick Caley in that office can get the most out of guys. He's coming from two organizations, where Julian Edelman, Pro Bowler, got success out of Chris Hogan, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp. Those were later round guys. Nacua was a 5th round pick. And so, the expectation is they're going to be able to get some guys, whether it be at 25 or later in the draft, to come in and complement Nico in the offense. Now, before we go to the second segment, one unit that you did not mention, the D tackle unit at 25, Nolan, Kenneth Grant. Those are guys that for Houston, you extend Daniil Hunter, so he has 2 more seasons left. But by the time you're ready to pay Will Anderson, you still got these guys on rookie deals to extend the swarm defense. Do you do that at 25, Cole? Because I like Nolan. I'm
going to be completely real. If Walter Nolan's there at 25, that to me right now feels like the pick. And I know that it's so wrong to say because
we've seen a lot of my drafts where he's there.
You pay for Mario Edwards on a 2-year deal. You still have Tim Settle. You're bringing in Sheldon Rankins on a very team-friendly contract. He fits your defense. Your questions are on the offensive side, and I get it. But it's like the Nicky Manwari thought. Like there was a thought of me that just said, if he's there at 25, let D'Amico get a dude. Just let him get a dude for this defense that's going to be a foundational piece that'll help you have a top 10 unit for the next 5 years. That's Walter Nolan for me. Such a agile, mobile freak of nature that's great in run support. Good overall frame. He is phenomenal at reaching the quarterback. He wins a lot of one-on-one battles. And I know it's completely out of left field, but I've spoken to so many people in the industry about what Kenneth Grant is. He is not the D'Amico Ryans mold in the terms of defensive tackles that you go after, but the way he plays is the way that you want a defensive tackle to play for D'Amico Ryans. And if I'm getting Kenneth Grant, now if I could trade back to 32 and let a team like Kansas City move on up or Philadelphia move on up and I get a 3rd round pick in return.
Do not help Kansas City.
I'm not trying to help out Kansas City. What I'm just saying is if I can help, if a team wants to go take that risk on, let's just say it's Luther Burden, or let's just say it's Josh Connerly out of Oregon to be their franchise left tackle, and I can get Kenneth Grant at 32 and a 3rd round pick. That's a better deal and a bigger win for me than it is to go ahead and take the dude at 25. That's where my brain is. So I know a lot of people are saying that, hey, we got to get offense. We got to get a wide receiver. We got to get a offensive tackle. And it's but if I can trade back 5 spots, get myself a long-term established defensive lineman to pair with Daniil Hunter, Will Anderson, on top of having Kamari Lassiter, Kalen Bullock, knowing that I'm going to have CJ Gardner-Johnson on a very team-friendly contract for the next 2 years, what I got at the linebacker position. Also, we haven't even mentioned Will Anderson, who's going to get a brand new contract extension. And who knows if Sheldon Rankins, if he is the same version we saw in 2023, don't think that he's leaving this defense because we already saw what happened when he did. I got a backbone defense for the next 4 or 5 years that's going to guarantee be top 10. And if I have a top 10 defense and if my offensive line is schemed properly, what's there to say that I'm not ready to take that next jump as an identity for the Texans in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, let's talk about the offense when we come back, because regardless of how we feel, they need to address getting offensive weapons. So we got more Locked On Texans. We got more draft talk with my man Cole Thompson. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we move forward, Cole, I want to give you a shout out here on the show for being a part of 790 and the family over there now, man.
I am. Yeah,
that just
that's
happened
new
this week.
Yeah, it just happened. Brand new. It's fun.
Yeah,
I'm excited. I'm excited to actually be like in local media again, like on radio while also doing Texans Wire and doing all that stuff. Which, by the way, role's not changing. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still doing SEC Unfiltered on the side. So if you want to talk about SEC football, you can still catch me over there. Texans Wire, I'm still doing content over there. I'm just throwing more onto my busy plate to kind of overflow. But that's like my entire life. I'm a buffet. Like I got to go back for seconds and thirds and fourths. And I do draft content. I do NFL content. I do regular season content and college football content. So I'm a jack of all trades, which is why John Hickman has me on, because I'm probably the one person in this dang city that can talk about anything and entertain you with factual, actual, in detail information.
That's why I opened up the show, our segment. Hey, he knows more about who you know about, and he knows about who you don't know about. That's Cole Thompson, a football encyclopedia. But on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, there's no way we can expect a Nico Collins-led room, but then the rest of those guys, Christian Kirk coming off injury, Justin Watson, Braxton Berrios, John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, those guys are not going to raise the bar.
No.
Houston has to get outside playmakers. They have to address that in the draft because they haven't done it so far. I'm glad that you said that.
They have to get outside playmakers. And I'm saying this nicely. Emeka Egbuka, phenomenal wide receiver. That's a slot-only dude. So let's focus it on the guys on the outside, because I'm not letting Christian Kirk, that you just brought in, be an outside receiver. No, that would be a nightmare scenario.
They need an outside receiver. And I like Emeka. I think scheme properly, he can do a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
I think the effort in the run game that he gives is a positive. But late round picks for Houston, let's say if they go the route of, addressing the tackle early, maybe D-tackle early, is Isaiah Bond a guy that you like with that 4.3 speed that can come in and be an impactful player for the Houston Texans? So just give me your thoughts on the wide receiver class and who you believe that Houston can benefit from.
You know how I feel about Isaiah Bond. I have told you many a time how I feel about Isaiah Bond and how I just there's things about him that drive me nuts. But you didn't say round 1 or round 2. You said later round guys. He's a Z receiver that I think could absolutely work in Nick Caley's system if he is willing to become a more stable blocker. That was one of the very few things that I didn't like about his film when he was at Texas. The other thing that I didn't like about his film, he rounds off the top of his routes. And it's a major area of weakness in the NFL that a lot of people aren't paying enough attention to. But heck, remember when we look back at that game against Georgia in the SEC championship, and Quinn Ewers, your favorite quarterback of all time, threw a early interception. That was not on 3. You can blame 3 all you want, but the fact is that Isaiah Bond rounded off the top of his route to allow Dalen Everett to go win the outside route and get that interception. That will not be able to transition into the NFL and have a successful career. But the speed is there. The route tree that you want is there. I think that for the style of offense for Nick Caley, it absolutely fits. So I understand, like, if you were to say, let's go early round, day 3, like you trade out of one of those third round picks to get like an extra 4th or something like that. And then with that first round pick, you take it. Or even if you were to take him like at 89, or like you trade back simply and go to like 92 or 93. I can buy into that a little bit. Here would be the dream scenario for me right now if I was in round 3. If you were able to address the offensive line and maybe defensive line, or you go back-to-back offensive line. You get yourself a franchise left tackle of the future at 25 or in a trade back, and you get yourself an interior offensive lineman. Like Marcus Mbu coming out of Purdue, he's going to shift inside a guard. If I could get him at like pick 58, I think that's a massive win. Kyle Williams from Washington State, if that guy is available in round 3.
He's becoming a fan favorite in the Texas fan base.
Hickman, he is the most complete separator in this year's class. Like, I do not buy into what PFF is saying, like Sam Monson, all those people, like wide receiver number 2. Like, okay, we are way overreaching on this kid, and you are setting him up to fail.
Excuse me?
Oh, yeah, there were people who were saying wide receiver 2 in this class, Kyle Williams from Washington State.
Okay.
Again, you're setting him up to fail.
He is talented. Yeah, he is talented.
They had him ahead of Emeka Egbuka. They didn't even have Emeka Egbuka in the top 10 of their wide receivers. So automatically, if you don't have Emeka Egbuka in your top 10 wide receiver, I don't want your opinion. I'm sorry, I just don't. because of whether or not you think that he is a great receiver or an overrated receiver. The dude's consistency for his 3 years at Ohio State speaks the volume of what I want in a top 10 playmaker at this year's wide receiver draft class. But still, Kyle Williams, when you talk about what his position is, he's a Z receiver. He's got great speed. He has a good catch radius. He tracks footballs like no one's business. He does a great job of winning off the line of scrimmage. And the thing is that you talk about like Nick Nash, who was a guy that you're very high on, and how he was able to transition coming on and from playing quarterback at San Jose State to moving on over to wide receiver. That same competition that Nick Nash went up against, Nick Nash had better numbers in consistency when it came to yards per game. Yards after contact, there was nobody better in college football than Kyle Williams. Finished with over 1,000 receiving yards last season with a different quarterback, I might add in. The quarterback that many people believe will go number 1 overall, Cam Ward, had 896 receiving yards, 21 total touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, in his last 2 years out in Pullman, Washington. And keep in mind, Hickman, one of those years was in the Pac-12, when the Pac-12 was probably the best conference in college football in 2023, and he still had 896 receiving yards. If I could add him in round 3 and like pick number 89, I'm getting myself a starting caliber wide receiver 2, who I think has the opportunity to be the best wide receiver 2 in the NFL. Now, I'm not saying, again, wide receiver 2 as in like the T. Higgins thing. T. Higgins is a wide receiver 1 masquerading as a wide receiver 2. Chris Godwin, if you threw him in most offenses, he'd be a wide receiver 1. I'm talking about a guy that I'm consistently expecting to get 55 to 70 catches for 685 to 895 yards.
Now, before we close out, here's a name that I want to throw out to you, but before I do, I'm sorry.
No, I said, go ahead.
Would love to have Jahmyr Gibbs in that speed. Can we get a Jahmyr Gibbs? No, he's
defensively. Do you look for a certain type of linebacker?
I know who you're talking about. I know who it is. I know we talked about it. Can I just real quickly just finish? Jack Besh, if he's there at pick number 79, at least consider him. That is the ideal Nick Caley type of wide receiver. Like, I get it. 58 maybe feels like a reach. If you feel really good about the offensive line and what you're going to draft, go for it. But Jack Besh is the last name I want to throw in like that round 3 type of wide receivers. Like, the worst you're going to get out of him is a wide receiver 4. The best you're going to get out of him is a wide receiver 2. Now, let's talk about Jaden Blue.
There we go.
Let's talk about Jaden Blue. This kid is okay. We're gonna hit pause. Everybody in Houston, because I'm not gonna get clipped on this, and then somebody's gonna come at me later on, 15 weeks from now, and go, "How dare you set us up to fail?" Jaden Blue is not Jahmyr Gibbs. He is not Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not.
But
the versatility.
Speed.
The versatility.
Yes.
That is what excites me. Jaden Blue would have probably led Texas in every single category and put up better numbers if he didn't have a fumbling issue. That was the only thing early on in the season that stopped Jaden Blue from being a 1,500 rusher, 1,800 total yards for scrimmage, and a 12 touchdown guy for the Longhorns that would have helped them go to the college football playoff national championship. The fumbling issue was the only thing that you worried about. But everything else is so fun about him. He's got great speed. As a receiving threat, he does a good job of winning his one-on-one battles. He's a willing blocker. And if you know anything about Nick Caley, it's going to come in handy if you're willing to block. I think the biggest thing about him is that he has good open field speed. He's got exceptional vision. He knows where to cut. He's a complementary piece. And the thing is that I know that when you look at a team like the Texans, you still want to trust Joe Mixon to be your bell cow producer. I get that. Why not? I mean, he had 1,000 yards. He's the first running back since Carlos Hyde in 2019 to get 1,000 rushing yards. Lean into that. That's something that you want to have. But do you remember what this offense looked like when Joe Mixon was sidelined and you had to trust Cam Akers, Dameon Pierce, Dare Ngumbawale? And I'm not saying anything negative about any of those guys because they play in the NFL and I'm talking to a microphone and hopefully get paid for a living. Like that's when
Dameon got an opportunity, he did fairly well.
But they're not at the same level to where every single game you're saying to yourself, we feel good that we can get 89 to 92 rushing yards. Jaden Blue can be that guy. And I think Jaden Blue late round pick, knowing that Darian Gubawale is only back on a 1-year deal, knowing that you don't have that fourth running back just in case of anything, knowing that Dameon Pierce is going into a contract year, knowing that Joe Mixon, for as good as he was last year, will be turning 30 this offseason, it at least gives you that secondary punch. And again, what were some of the best teams in the NFL last year? The ones that had that secondary punch. The beauty about what works for Ben Johnson's offense and what worked out in Detroit is you had the Thunder and the Lightning. Get down Houston. Why not? Like why not try?
That is Cole Thompson. I'm John Hickman. Thank y'all for checking us out today. Cole, please, before you leave, let everybody know where they can find all of your amazing work.
If you want to check me out, it's at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter. I'm at Texans Wire. We write daily content. We got draft content coming out all day. If you want to check out anything with the SEC surrounding the 16 teams that are the best conference to ever exist, John Hickman knows this now as he's the card-carrying member of the SEC with Hook'em at SEC Unfiltered. And, of course, you can listen to me, Adam Clanton, and Adam Wexler every single day on the A-Team from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., Sports Talk 790, or on the iHeartRadio app.
All right. Thank you, Cole, for stopping by. I appreciate it, man. Locked On listeners, thank you for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
And make sure you follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter, Big Star Sports with a Z at the end.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.